Adapter works much better.
Well, let's try this adapter. I mean, it's been... I don't mind using my old phone. It's just you can barely see the screen when we do the recording on it.
Yeah.
Exactly. This one seems to be a little better. But finding the right adapter, like that white adapter I had from the microphones, and then half the time it cut out. Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Yeah, pretty stupid.
Yeah. All right, then. Welcome to the Upstate. I'm Mari.
And as per usual, I'm Matthew.
And today we're going to go to the Civil War. Have we discussed the Civil War yet?
No, well, I don't know.
I think
we touched upon it in a few other episodes, but...
We skirted around it.
We skirted around it.
Okay.
We did a peripheral kind of thing.
Now, everyone's heard of Andersonville. I know people have heard of Andersonville. There was a movie made of it. The atrocities, they're very well known. So in a nutshell, if you haven't heard of Andersonville, look it up. It was a prisoner of war camp during the Civil War in which a lot of prisoners died. We're not talking about Andersonville. We're talking about Hellmira today. And Hellmira was a prisoner of war camp in Elmira, New York, towards the end of the war. In fact, really close to the end of the war.
It was only open for a few months.
A year. 1 year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 1 year.
It is, if you go by casualties, right behind Andersonville for casualties. Within, I think, 10 or 20 deaths.
24% casualties as compared to Andersonville, which was a few points higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, very close. And it got the name Hellmira pretty quickly. But as we're going to discuss, it really wasn't due to the Union officers who were in charge of it. The ones who were directly in charge, I should say, the ones who actually had to deal with the prisoners of war. A little background on the Civil War, prisoner of war. They didn't take prisoners originally when the war started. Did you know that? I mean, I know you used to be a big Civil War buff, so you probably know that, right? They didn't take prisoners right away. What they would do instead, they'd do prisoner exchanges or prisoner paroles. And it was the prisoner paroles that became the problem. Because basically it was, we caught you. Do you promise not to fight again? Yeah, I promise not to fight again. Okay, go home. So guess what happened?
Well, you're going to find that you're going to be pressed back into service if you go back up north or back down south, because even though you were taken prisoner of war and you're square with the people who took you prisoner, that the
side you're fighting,
it's going to be a little more hard-nosed about the remainder of your service.
And also you had people who were letting themselves be caught as prisoners of war just to be sent home.
Yeah.
Too. So there was two things going on. And then the prisoners' exchange started...
Which is dangerous.
Oh, God, yeah. And then the prisoners' exchange started getting too... there were too many prisoners' exchanges. It was taking too much time out of the battle, basically. And I'm just doing a nutshell. You Civil War nuts, don't get mad at me. That's the Cliff Note version of what was going on, okay?
Yeah, bear that in mind. Stitch counters.
Yeah, right. There's a few things we're discussing in this episode where I'm going to have to do the Cliff Note version, but a few of them we will circle back to in later episodes. One interesting fact was the commander was a Major Henry V. Colt. And yes, of the famous American gunsmith family, the Colts. His brother was the one who came up with the Colt gun, the Colt
revolver.
Colt revolver, thank you. Yeah. I was going to say 45, but I don't think it was the 45 at that point.
No. 44 and 36 caliber.
Okay.
The predominant. Walker, who was a colonel in what was still the Dragoons back in the late 1840s, commissioned Colt and worked along with him to develop a handheld firearm that would take a musket cartridge. And that's where things like the .44 caliber Colt and the Texas Behemoth come from. The Walker Dragoons was the first Colt that was serviceable by the United States Army somewhere around 1848. You folks can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Yeah. No time to do a quick search, but my favorite pattern of Colt is the .44 caliber Colt Dragoons, which is a Navy pattern 3, which has got a lot of the problems worked out of it, such as the loading arm, for instance, for the cylinders, has a little catch on it, so that every time you fire the gun, the loading arm doesn't fall down from the force of the shot. And that was one of the things about the early Walker Dragoons. Okay. That was one of the problems that Colt solved. But then by the 1860s, they came up with the 1860 pattern. Remington, I believe, was the company that came up with a full frame. Colt had an open frame where the cylinder would be taken out of the top to clean and reload. Okay. Whereas the early 1860s pattern, new model Army revolver, had a full frame on it. And was much more manageable and didn't jam as often as the Colt. Okay. So yeah, just to give you a little background to that.
All right. But that was all his brother. That was all Henry's brother. But Henry, what's interesting about him is he was well liked by both the Union soldiers and the Confederate prisoners, which I think is extremely unusual. Sorry for the noise if you can hear in the background. It is winter here.
It's winter in central New York.
And our heaters just kicked in. Yeah. Apologize. But yeah, he came out of it well liked, which says a lot when you consider the horrible conditions Hellmira was under. He was still well liked by the prisoners, which I think says a lot about the man.
So it wasn't their treatment that made it hell. It was
we're going to get into it. Was the conditions, and I gotta say, I'm going to defend Colt and the Union soldiers who were actually working there at the time. Their hands were tied, really, literally, because it wasn't supposed to be a prisoner of war camp.
No.
Let's start at the beginning here.
Right.
Hellmira, the site that became the Hellmira prison camp had been a training facility for Union soldiers, and that's what it was built for. It wasn't built to take in prisoners. It was built originally to be a training area, and it was also a muster point. So this is where a lot of the people who were signing up in the southern part of New York southern central part of New York would go and meet the trains.
Because it was a crossroad between the Erie Railway and the Northern Central Railway, and it crisscrossed in the midst of the city. And it was made a perfect mustering point, but 30 acres of it, and it was known as Camp Rathburn, and then Camp Chemung, Chemung.
But then in July 6, 1864, the orders came down and it became a prisoner of war camp, and this lasted nearly exactly a year, because it was closed on July 11th, 1865. So you're talking, what, a year and a week?
Yeah.
A year and a week this prison camp was engaged. Okay. So, all right, it's a year. I forgot how long Andersonville was open. I can't look it up real quick. Okay, so just by the amount of death in the short period of time, Hellmira is probably worse if you just go by casualties.
They had an outbreak of smallpox.
Oh, yeah.
And
it was nearly 3,000.
Typhoid.
3,000 people died in that 12-month period. 12 months and 1 week period.
2,963 prisoners died at the camp.
Yeah, mainly of malnutrition, harsh winter weather, and poor sanitary conditions.
Insufficient food, typhoid, smallpox.
Oh, yeah.
Inadequate medical care. They were just not
prepared.
They went, like you said, it's like they got the word overnight.
Yeah.
That, okay, you're no longer going to be a training camp because things are falling into disuse, and you've only got one barracks 13 left. Like Stalag 13. Ooh. All right. And so they're like, oh, well, now you're going to be a prison camp.
Yeah.
Well, where are we going to put them? We don't have any barracks. Everything else
they
has
had
fallen
no
to
shelters
disuse.
for the prisoners
None.
who would come in. They didn't even have a hospital set up. It basically was a tent.
Yeah.
And this is in July, okay, which can get very hot in New York, but you're heading into winter. They had to use a tent all through winter.
You have a situation where the soldiers,
who are working
there, complaining about the conditions.
Yes, because they're living in the same
prisoners.
things.
Yeah, because they're living in the same kind of conditions.
They were never given enough allotment for food for the prisoners that came in. They were basically begging for things. I mean, we'll go into some of the horrible things.
It was a breakdown of management
at
the top.
And now you can see why the commander, who would normally in these situations would be like, oh, that SOB, he's keeping all the good stuff for himself. That wasn't the case. I think everyone, the prisoners and the guards and even the public at large, saw how much he was struggling trying to get things in.
There was no top to skim off of.
Yeah, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And you had people who, on the outside, would try to bring stuff in for the prisoners. I mean, something like socks.
Yeah.
And, of course, you can't do that. His hands are tied at this point. But, okay, we'll get into this. The main reason they got the poor sanitary conditions is Foster Pond was like the main runoff area. Yeah, it was not made to hold the refuse and garbage of nearly 13,000 people. Yes.
The dysentery.
Nearly 3,000 people died there, but it had over 12,000 prisoners. So again, we're talking a large amount of prisoners to take care of in a very short period of time and not given the supplies in which to do so. There.
Absolutely.
Now you can see why this leads to this horrible conditions.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, let's follow along the timeline and see what some of these began and end. You start from there, from day one, you're stymied.
Yep.
And then, before you even start out, the Shahola train wreck occurs.
That's horrible. Yes.
And trying to get the prisoners up to the camp.
Well, they were bringing most of the prisoners up from, I think it was in Maryland somewhere. Not because the prison there was overcrowded, but they were afraid that the Confederates were going to naval bomb it. I forgot where it was coming from. Hold on, give me 2 seconds here. I'll look it up. Point Lookout. Thank you.
Point Lookout.
In Maryland. Yeah. Okay. So they wanted to move the prisoners inland, so there was a target, basically. And so that's why they were sending them to Hellmira. They were sending them all by train. They got the camp ready by June, and the first 2,000 transferred in. Now remember, I said at the end, over 12,000 people were there. Again, it's only open for 12 months, so you can imagine how quickly they filled this place.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so they were sending the first 2,000 men there into groups of 400. So 400 of them stuck on a train. Here's your food for the trip, and then they sent on their way. But they're like stuck on this train, and it was standing room only.
Right.
The first group of 400 prisoners arrived on July 6th. They were unloaded, put in double columns, and marched to the camp. Eyewitnesses described the men as being dirty, ragged, but happy to be removed from the conditions of the train. Upon arriving, they were counted and divided groups of 100 and shown their quarters. So that's how the majority of them came to that camp. They were just shoved on these trains, sent to Hellmira, and then marched down from what used to be the mustering point to leave to go to the war. Now they were marched down to the camp. The Shahola disaster happened right after it opened, July 15th.
Oh, great timing.
Yes. It was carrying 833 POWs and 128 Union guards heading to Hellmira. It collided with a coal train in Shahola, Pennsylvania, I believe it was. 49 POWs and 17 guards were killed instantly and many more seriously wounded. Basically, the survivors had to clear the line and back on the train and be shipped up to Hellmira. So, I mean, think about that. They sent more than near their normal group to meet these men. They sent a special contingent of stretcher bearers, guards, and a caravan of 12 wagons. Those who could walk were told to walk to the prison camp. They were marched into the camp and given a meal. Then the more seriously wounded were loaded aboard the wagons and basically sent to the pretty much non-existent hospital. Like I said, it was basically a tent. It was a field tent. And, of course, we get into the famous war amputations. And
yeah.
I know Hollywood has really played up how horrible they were and even made them worse than they were. But it was the quickest way to save some of these people's lives, really, is to amputate. In other words, you're talking about gangrene. But anyway, this is not a good start.
In many cases, the wounds had been left to fester already and already became gangrenous.
Yeah.
So...
Yep.
Instead of dying of septicemia or something, maybe, getting rid of the wound. They didn't have the kind of medical technology that we have now, like blood transfusions, surgeries that would excise the areas.
The transfusions were a few decades away, yeah.
And they had a very little understanding of bacteriology. Back then, they didn't know that bacteria, caused.
Again, that's a few decades away.
Exactly.
But so, which may have led to the part why the pond became such a killing area. Because think about it, that's where everything was being dumped. Everything was being dumped, and anyone who's familiar with that part
including
of the state,
the old arms and legs.
Probably. Just think about all the effluents and everything going down there. Now, if anybody lives in that part of New York State, guess what happens in the spring down there usually? You get flooded pretty bad.
Yeah, it floods out.
So
that spreads everywhere.
Exactly.
I wonder, has anybody excavated the pond?
I'm sure they're working on that now because they're trying to
see what's there.
They're trying to save some of this area. We'll jump ahead a little bit, but for a while there, this was such the dirty, embarrassing secret that they literally tried to bury the records of this for a while. But people still needed to remember. I mean, they already had a cemetery, which we'll discuss, a national cemetery put aside because of the work of one man who lived in town there. We will discuss. It was very interesting. So they had a national cemetery there that had Confederate and Union soldiers buried. So it wasn't like they couldn't totally wipe the slate clear of what was there. Well, but they did build over the site. People didn't really want to talk about it.
It's one of those things. They weren't prepared for it. Though.
Yeah, but it was like blamed. That was how they dealt with it afterwards. I can't say they totally wiped it out of the public memory because, like I said, they had the National Cemetery there in Elmira, and also you had Mark Twain talking about it too. Heads up, folks! Those of you who don't know, Mark Twain is buried in Elmira. Famous Southern writer is buried in New York. So, yes, he is. In fact, got another interesting bit of trivia related to it with him. But anyway, that didn't last too long. This thing of like, we don't want to discuss this. This is embarrassing. Now they've reconstructed the barracks. They're trying to bring back all these historical records, and we will have to mention, I'll get to the guy who single-handedly probably allowed, single-handedly, nearly 3,000 men would have died with no name if it wasn't for him. So we'll get to him. I want to talk about him in particular. But let's talk about what happened with the camp. So they're sending these, just keep sending them. They just keep sending them. And
thanks for your service, fellows. Here, have some prisoners.
Yeah, and they just open them onto Elmira, right? But things are slow. Outside the prison, you had people gathering out there to watch the prisoners. In fact, it became such the entertainment that the prisoners themselves would put on like shows and entertain the crowds, and the crowds would throw them food and money and whatever. Well, that got to put a stop to it. But if they think they would have kept that up through the whole thing, pretty soon they'd be throwing them blankets and everything. It could have been a good way for them to get supplies, but the higher ups went, nope, can't have them used as entertainment. But
yeah, you can't use prisoners of war as entertainment. That's unseemly.
But the prisoners were doing it themselves. It wasn't like, the commander was coming out and saying, you're going to put on a show. No, they saw the people out there gawking at them, so they put on the show. They would do things and make, and entertain the crowds. Right. In fact, a platform was built so the crowds could see. But the higher ups
another subject and another time and place where there's precious little entertainment to be had.
Now, 5 days after the camp opened, Surgeon Charles Alexander was ordered to inspect the camp. Alexander found 2 major problems with the camp. Remember, this is what, a week, 5 days after it opened? Okay. First was the sanitary conditions were already bad. They had not done anything to improve the sanitary conditions. The sinks near Foster's Pond contained stagnant water, so even before we start getting the big influx of prisoners, we're already seeing problems with the water from Foster's Pond. He feared if it was not cleaned, they will become offensive and a source of disease. So he wanted new sinks built, but no one did it. Okay. By the middle of August, the number of prisoners climbed to 9,000. Now this is too many. They don't have enough staff to take care of them. The supplies are dwindling very fast, and now the first round of diseases go through the camp.
Yeah.
The death toll went from 11 in July to 121 by the end of August. Finally, at the end of October, they decided, well, maybe the drainage system's a good idea. Now, if it's any weather like we had this year, we're just a week into November, we're already getting our first snow.
Yeah.
You know?
And the people from the prisoners from the South aren't used to
right.
this kind of climate.
Yep. So it didn't. So they didn't even get the drainage done until January. So imagine working out in those conditions. Yeah.
Being workers and out there digging these drainages.
Like I kept saying, the hospital was basically a tent, and that was one of the other complaints that Alexander had. Is like, you need a decent hospital. You can't just have a tent. And on top of it, they didn't have an assigned surgeon.
What?
Yeah, they didn't have an assigned surgeon. They would have to call out to the town and use the local doctor.
Oh my goodness sakes! How many doctors were in the Hellmira area?
I know, but they used one for sure. But they didn't even have a staff medical officer, to oversee it and make sure it ran properly. Well, they did give them 3 pavilion wards finally for the hospital. Okay.
Yeah, right. You mean 3 stewards?
No.
Or
pavilions. So I don't know if those were more temporary, but
no. What I mean by stewards is.
You mean the person that actually do
exactly.
Yeah, they didn't even really have that. I mean, you should have had somebody.
That's basic care.
Well, look, like I said, this was not the best situation for everybody.
And they were just kind of foisted on them.
Yep. So many of the prisoners stayed in tents. And this is even through the New York winter. Mainly, they were getting a hard time getting food in there. Plus, the one steward they did have really was a penny pincher. Yeah. And he just kept cutting it to the bare minimum because he was trying to make things stretch. Most of the prisoners lived in tents, like I said. Only about 600 of them could fit into the actual weather-protected barracks, probably, at least keep you out of the snow and the wind. Lumber never showed up until October. And then in November, you find out the barracks that were there already that they were using had never been prepared properly. Roofs were falling in. Floors were breaking apart. It was,
That's ridiculous.
There were over 2,000 POWs sleeping in tents, and by Christmas, 900 still had not received proper housing. Now, there was a Colonel Eastman that was in charge for a while under Colt. You get conflicting reports. Some say he was a right piece of work, all right? That he really was, the evil warden type thing. Other people say he ended up that way because his hands were tied by bureaucracy. He tried and just kept hitting one paperwork wall after another, Like I said, we started with Colt, who was well liked by everybody, and then they started just flip. Look at how many commanders we've already gone through. We haven't even hit 1865 yet. Yeah. It's not even been 5 months, and we've gone to at least 2 of them already. Now, here we hit the winter. Winter in New York. Oh, ends up being a brutal cold one that year. Average temperature of negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty dang cold for the southern tier. I gotta give it. I mean, you expect that off where we live up here.
It was one of the colder years there.
Yeah. And of course, they had to reduce rationings because that one steward just believed in cutting everybody to the bare minimum. So most of these men are on starvation level. You're not going to make it through the winter on that. No. Right. By March, hundreds of men had frozen to death or succumbed to disease. A spring thaw then led to the floods. If they were in barracks, everybody was on the top bunks because the floor was full of water. Okay. We also had rats.
Oh, of course, the pestilence.
The rats. Now, the rats is an interesting situation because, of course, you got the bad sanitary conditions. You've got food there, but, barely enough to go around to the prisoners, and then the rats get into it. And the rats, being rats, are going to multiply and get into everything. So the prisoners started taking upon themselves, along with some of their guards, to catch the rats and eat the rats. Some of the prisoners they were sold to, and some of the, somebody would catch a rat and they'd sell it to them for like a penny or 5 cents or whatever. Other times the prisoners would catch it themselves. That went along really well until they got a dog in there to take care of the rat problem. Why not a cat? I don't know. But they got a dog. Doesn't matter. They were trying to take care of the rat problem, and 2 of the prisoners ate the dog. Yeah.
That dog looks mighty tasty.
Yeah. Well, we have another producer who wants to be in here. Who is it? It's Honey.
Producer Honey.
We were talking about rats. There's no rats in here, sweetie. She's our hunting kitty, if you remember.
Yes. She's very good at mousing.
So, yes, do you think there were escape attempts?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was.
Certain there are probably successful escape attempts as well.
Well, only 10 successfully left.
All right.
Some of them were quite simple. We literally had one guy who just jumped over the fence and ran. There were a couple tunnels. I'm not talking with like a Hogan Heroes type situation, but it was mainly tunnels and just getting over the fence, getting over the stockade. But only 10 actually made it. Now we're going to talk about, we mentioned nearly 3,000 prisoners of war died there. We have to talk for a moment about the sexton of the local Baptist church. His name was John W. Jones, and we will do a show just on this man. But I'm going to give you the cliff notes of him. John W. Jones was an ex-slave. He had left the plantation he worked at. He was actually treated quite well. The family that ran the plantation were well known to be fair, and he worked in the house, so he was very well treated. The problem was their owner was getting very up in age, and they were scared what was going to happen when she passed away. So that's why he took off with four other slaves from there. And they walked from their plantation up to Elmira, because Elmira at that point had already started becoming a stop on the Underground Railroad. John W. Jones, decides he's going to stay in Elmira. And he started out small. He would chop wood for people. He worked in a tallow factory for a while, but he got a reputation around the area, and he worked with the Underground Railroad there. But his main job was he became like I said, the sexton of the Baptist church. And he had 2 interesting duties. One was taking care of the church, obviously, being the sexton. He had to take care of the grounds and the cemetery and, ring the bell. Well, he ended up with some interesting duties because of this. The local fire brigade, the volunteers, they didn't have like a central, like now if there's a fire, you hear the fire alarm go off in the fire department. They didn't have that back then, obviously. So one of the volunteers would have to run over to his house, over to John W. Jones, and ask him to ring the church bell so they could alert the rest of the volunteers. And there was a competition that went on with all the sextons in the area, that the fire department would pay them $2 whoever got the bells ringing first. John was smart. He ran a rope from the bell in the church to his bedroom, which was right next to the church, and they would, he'd always win because all he had to do was roll over and start rolling on the bell, even in the middle of the night. So there's some ingenuity. He also had to take care of the cemetery there. So what do you do with all the dead that's coming from the POW camp? A very common solution even back then was just dig a big pit and dump them in there,
Yeah.
We saw at the end of Glory. That's what happened to most of the 54th.
Yeah,
on that one.
And it seems like Andersonville.
Yeah.
They just dump them in a big...
Did not happen there. John W. Jones took his job quite seriously, and he kept meticulous records. He would find out the name of the prisoner that died. He would catalog and store any personal items they had. Any personal items that he felt they needed to be buried with, they were cataloged and buried with the soldier. He knew exactly where they were buried when they died. He had meticulous records. In fact, of the 2,900 prisoners that died there, only 7 were buried with no name. After the war, families of these prisoners, had the decision to make. Do they want them exhumed and sent home, or do they want to keep them there? And so many were impressed with how well he treated the body of their deceased that they basically left them there. I think only like 10 were removed and sent back home. The rest were left there. And also due to his meticulous records, that is how that became a national cemetery. And it's interesting, as he was burying them, he buried them as if they were standing for, what do you call that, review? No. When you have everybody line up in the morning.
Oh, that was inspection.
The inspection.
Morning roll call.
Morning roll call. So all the Confederate POWs were arranged in the cemetery as if they were under roll call. And around them are the Union soldiers that died in their regiment. So this is what he did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and think of this is an ex-slave. In fact, one of the people that he buried was a relative from his owners, from the plantation he left. And he actually went back to the plantation afterwards, the place he had ran away from, to bring back the personal items to that person, for that person. But remember, too, that family was known to treat their slaves quite well, so there wasn't I don't think there was any fear in his heart of going back. He just felt obligated, and they received him quite warmly. So he actually did a lot to not only preserve the names of all the people that died at Hellmira. You think about it, he had the perfect opportunity to be I'm going to get these guys back, and he didn't. He took his job as sexton seriously, and he made sure that they were treated with dignity. I find that part of the story very intriguing. Very, very good. And think how much history he saved. And think how many families had closure. It wasn't just, we have no idea we know he was a prisoner of war, but we don't know where he died, we don't know where he's buried. No, they knew exactly where their loved one was. And like I said, so many of them were so impressed with how he treated them and how well he kept the records that they left him there. They felt it was the most honorable thing to do. So, gotta give it to the John W. Jones. I mean, that is, think about the time period. Even nowadays, you hear horror stories of, like, funeral parlors stacking remains in their basement and not actually burying them. You still hear horror stories of that happening today. And this guy took his job seriously. He was a sexton there for 42 years. And while he's burying these guys, he's also running that part of the Underground Railroad. So, like I said, we'll come back to him and go into more of his life later. That was the nutshell of John W. Jones, but I had to mention something. And he is actually buried pretty close to where Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, is buried in Elmira. So if we ever get down to Elmira, probably the same trip where we're going to take and ride all the carousels of Binghamton, we'll have to go pay respects to those two, Mark Twain and John W. Jones. So it's, and if you want to go visit the cemetery, it's the Woodlawn National Cemetery in Elmira. Like I said, it became a national cemetery due to his. Okay, we covered it pretty quickly, I think. But yeah, that's a bit of nasty Civil War history that's in.
Okay, somebody worked up the 20 facts about Elmira's Civil War prison camp.
Yes, that was from
by Ray Finger.
Yep.
Published on July 26, 2014. And they go on to say, one day after the first 400 Confederates arrived in Maryland, 2 prisoners scaled them out of prison camp's 12-foot stockade while it escaped.
Yep.
At the beginning of the Civil War, Elmira had been a military recruiting depot, of course. The story about the dog.
Yep, yeah.
And insufficient food.
Yeah, I think we've covered
the John W. Jones observation platform with chairs and binoculars was set up, for the entertainments. After the Civil War, a House committee that investigated the condition of the prisoners' Confederate camps declared that evidence proved Confederates were determined to kill Union prisoners. However, the Union's mistreatment of this prisoner was dismissed as rumor, or they really were inadequate.
Yeah.
These facilities. And the prisoners who died in Elmira's prison camp were buried, became Woodlawn National Cemetery.
Yep.
While in sick furlough, Corporal Henry R. Evans was captured near Vermont, Florida in September. He was held in Elmira's prison camp until his release, July 7th, 65.
Mm-hmm.
After signing the loyalty oath. An old family story says that he had walked home and he was so emaciated when he arrived that his brothers and sisters didn't recognize him.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there are many attempts to tunnel out of Hellmira. A Reverend Thomas K. Beecher of the Park Church in Hellmira conducted the first Sunday service for the prisoners, July 24th, 64, through more than 12,000 Confederate POWs. Though more than 12,000 Confederate POWs were assigned to Hellmira's prison camp, there was only enough barrack space for 5,000 prisoners.
Yeah.
3 granite markers still survive that were dedicated in 1900.
Mm-hmm.
By the Baldwin Post of the Grand Army of the Republic at West Walter and Hoffman Streets, marking the prisoner camp's northernmost corner on West Walter Street. And that's what happened then. And it goes on.
Yeah. What's interesting is, like I said, there was a time where they were trying to cover it up, and even people were trying to say, well, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. They're exaggerating. Those Southern families are exaggerating. No, they weren't exaggerating. I mean, Mark Twain wrote about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Twain wrote about the conditions there. So they weren't exaggerating at all. It was a bad place. And like we said, it was, a lot of it really, you had a few people that were penny pinching or whatever, but a lot of it really had to do with, oh, you're a training thing? Oh, now you're prisoner of war camp. And really...
Yeah, here you go. They were redesignating
They were playing catch up until the part where they closed a year and a week later, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that 24% death rate in a year. That is just...
Thousands of people died.
Yeah. You know, like the early 1900s, some people tried to play it off. Like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Yeah, it was. Let's not make bones about it. Let's not, let's not lie about it. Or not lie about it, but let's not cover it up. Let's not make it... no, it was bad. Okay.
And if you want to split hairs, between who was worse... these places like Andersonville were set up to be death camps.
Right.
This just organically turned into a death camp.
Yeah.
Okay, so don't even compare.
But it's a thing we got to remember. And going back to the unearthly upstate thing, is there paranormal activity there? Actually, no.
Yes, that's right. Isn't
there
that
is no
interesting?
paranormal activity there.
A place ground where you think would be fertile for paranormal activity isn't.
You know what? We've got to thank John Jones for that.
Maybe.
He put those men to rest.
Is that not one of the key elements of a haunting? Is that the person in question was not put to rest properly.
And look what he did.
And
he made sure. I mean, there's only 7 of them that were not named, but he still made sure they got proper burials.
Imagine over 2,000. How many?
It was nearly 3,000 men.
Nearly 3,000 people.
Yeah.
Imagine nearly 3,000 ghosts milling around Hellmira, New York.
Oh.
Man, that would be terrible. Along with their Union.
Along with the Union soldiers too. Yeah.
Who died there from by proximity,
or came back, or were sent back and buried there because it was a national cemetery.
Yeah,
it became a national cemetery again, thanks to Jones.
Uh-huh.
So that is the account of Hellmira.
Yes.
The Hellmira prison camp. A little bit of the Civil War history of New York.
There's a lot of it.
And we are going to be touching upon another. We're going to go north later on in this season. You've got a great one coming up.
Oh yes, Fort Ontario.
Fort Ontario has a big...
Part 1.
Part 1, we actually have to divide.
Yes,
so much happened at Ontario.
So much going on with Ontario. It can't be put into a single episode.
But that's coming up later. I forgot what next week's going to be. I haven't even looked.
You'll find out when we do, folks.
Oh, hold on. Give me 2 seconds here. I'll find out. I do have these planned. We are.
Yeah, we do have all this stuff written down. Trust us. We got a plan here.
Well, I do have to apologize for Patreon supporters. We haven't got our Patreon out this month yet in November. We have been trying to record it. Things have been happening.
Yes.
So,
apologies for that.
Oh, next week.
Uh-huh.
Next week is a pretty modern one. I remember hearing about this growing up.
Well, then I must know it.
Oh, you know it very well.
Really?
In fact, there's a movie where, I think it's Tootsie. Might be Tootsie. where somebody's writing the play Return to Love Canal.
Oh, dear.
We're going to be talking about Love Canal, one of the worst environmental disasters in New York State. And guess what? Lawsuits are still going on.
You're still hearing about it.
There was one filed last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Still
Such a big disaster. We're still sorting through it, folks.
So we will talk about the famous Love Canal subdivision. So we've gone from horrible prison conditions to cancer grounds next week. Ground. Yes, we talk about the real happy stuff in this.
Welcome to the happy place.
So,
well, thank you for all our listeners.
Yep. Let's do a quick thank you for everyone who watches our Facebook page. Thank you for everyone who helps get the word out.
Thank you for to the people who just friended us recently.
Yes, a ton of them did. So I want to and again, I apologize to our Patreons. All five, I can count them on one hand, but I apologize to you guys for being late with ours. We will get our Patreon out though this month. We will not let you suffer there. You'll get your extra. Yeah, that's about it. And like I said, next week we're just going to talk about the same lovely type of subject.
Right. Thank you for listening to our Ghastly podcast.
Thank you. Have a good day now. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Unearthly Upstate. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, and on our webpage. We are also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, Google Podcasts, and CastBox. Please like, share, and review on your favorite platform. Unearthly Upstate is an Animator Liar production. The show is produced by Mari and Matt Manette, with purring provided by Honey and Lloyd. Research and writing by Mari Manette. Music is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Unless otherwise stated in the episode, the places mentioned in the broadcast are not paid or contact us for any type of promotion. Please check out our webpage for credit and sources for the episode. Thank you.